And good morning. Welcome in. Our guests join us on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. That is a rock star American IPA. Try one this week. Bell's Two-Hearted Ale. I want to say good morning. Welcome into you. It's been a crazy week coming out of rivalry week and weekend/week. And then the silly season, which is really a combination of the silly season is a combination of recruiting, college football recruiting, and then the coaching carousel. It's been a lot of fun the last few days. And I think Miami opens up tonight at midnight when Manny Diaz's buyout drops. And evidently the U may be pulling, and we'll talk to our next guest about maybe this a little bit later in the interview. We're obviously going to start with LSU, but Miami may commit financially like Southern, maybe not at that level, but at a much higher level than they have committed. Evidently, there have been meetings after meetings the last month and a half at Miami, and they realize, hey, we've gone cheap. And if we want to get into this game, you got to spend some money like LSU just did, like Southern Cal just did, and other teams. So if the U opens up tonight at midnight or whatever, which we think it will, watch out. And if they commit tens of millions of dollars over the next few years, that may be enough for Cristobal or someone else, Blake, to take that job. So we'll see. Out of bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. The show is brought to you by Sound and Communications, the leader in audio and visual equipment, both design and install, for churches, sports facilities, and businesses. SoundcomAV.com. We welcome in Mike Detillier, WWL Radio TV New Orleans, and he joins us on the Out of Bounds show. All right, Mike D., I think it's a heck of a hire for Scott Woodward. What was your reaction when you heard this was going to happen?
I always knew that he would shoot for a big game. That's been his MO. That's how he built his reputation. If you go back to when he was at Washington to grab Chris Peterson, when people didn't think he'd leave Boise State, and he comes to Texas A&M and he pulls Jimbo Fisher away, and he's at LSU. A lot of people told me there's no way Kim Mulkey's leaving Baylor. No way. And sure enough, he was able to grab it. The Jay Johnson hire as a baseball coach, which I think is a really good hire, but he wasn't the ABC guy. He wasn't one of the top three. But he landed a really good – I think is going to be a really good coach for LSU. And to be honest with you, I don't think Brian was the AB guy either. I think that was some early conversations. And what sort of tipped me off, Brian may be moving. And Kirk Herbstreit, well over a month ago, made a comment about don't be surprised if Brian Kelly gets the job at USC.
Right.
Okay, just think about Kirk isn't saying that unless Brian Kelly told him. There's something to that. Because Kirk takes a lot of grief here because he had come out to say that Les Miles would go to Michigan, and I think at that time, Les told him that. I have no doubt of that. If you've been around Les any period of time, Les is the worst secret keeper that you could have had. I mean, he'll tell you anything. Now, again, I think things changed from the time Les told him that until he decided to stay at LSU. But I think at that time, Kirk heard that directly from Les. Now, again, sometimes you got to listen well with Les because he'll tell you something, and he's got a certain speech that you really got to pay close attention to. And Jimbo's like that. I call it Jimbonese. He tells you something, and then after he finishes saying it, you like, Okay, repeat that one more time, because you're not real sure. Because he talks in a real fast manner. But there was no doubt Scott wanted Jimbo. He was his number one guy, and that was not going to happen. And there's way too many people that were involved that knew that I don't know if they made the offer to Lincoln, but there was great interest on both sides, and they got played a little bit. And I think what happens, and this is normally the case because they're just a handful of agents that handle top coaches. Okay, Lincoln decided he's going to Southern Cal, but I got a guy for you, Brian Kelly. And so, but I do think that there was some early discussion between Brian Kelly, his people, and also Scott Woodard. Now, again, each of them will say, well, Scott will say, well, Brian reached out to me, and then Brian's people will say, well, Scott reached out to us. So you got to understand sort of how the game is being played here. But he's the most accomplished football coach that has ever been hired by LSU.
Brian Kelly's a better coach than Jimbo Fisher, and in my opinion, a much better hire than Jimbo Fisher.
I agree. Listen, and I'm friends a long time with Jimbo, but I would agree with you. Jimbo didn't have the restrictions academically that Brian Kelly did at Notre Dame. Okay, because people don't understand that he's not playing on the same level field as other coaches are. Just as Stanford is different with academics to get in. It's a different world, and so there are some players that you basically can't get in. Bottom line, you can't get in. And I've been told that by numerous coaches that have been at Notre Dame that recruit this area. And, Notre Dame has been here 5 out of the last 7 years. They've signed a player from the state of Louisiana. They've heavily recruited the Texas area. So the stuff about, he doesn't know the area is not quite correct. He's a Midwestern coach, and that's where he's been, but that doesn't mean he didn't know it. People always will tell me about how Nick Saban was, but I did talk show on WWL, Buddy Diliberto and I can tell you, first 2 nights, it was 70-30 against Saban. And a lot of that was
Sure.
he got no ties here. What did he win at Michigan State? Okay, if he's such a great coach, what did he do? Did he beat Michigan? Is he in competition for the Big Ten championship? And I think a lot of the same reasons Nick left Michigan State, Brian, other than money certainly involved here, and that's some big dollars there. But he's in fertile to recruit, much more fertile ground than Indiana. He doesn't have to go a lot of different places, and they were a national recruit team, Notre Dame. But I do think it was a strong hire. And it was something, and even though he might not have been the first guy on the list, and we all know it was Jimbo, no matter what Woodward will say, it was always going to be Jimbo one, that he's a guy that I think can come in here and in a short period of time have LSU back up to snuff. And he's a grown-up.
Absolutely.
That's the other part of it. We've been through Les, and again, Les was always considered quirky, and then you find out he's a dirty old man, to boot. You find that out a little while. There had always been some rumors, but, now it's come out even more about Les. And then with Coach O, it was the swirl of the tornado after the national championship. So I think they wanted the grown-up in the room and a guy that wasn't going to give you no issues off the field. And I think that was a big reason why Scott stayed away from Lane Kiffin. He felt maybe that was a magnet that, he didn't want to have to deal with coaches on social media and
Sure.
and who knows what else. He didn't want to deal with that. at all. And, you know, it was a funny thing yesterday. I'm doing talk show in Oklahoma, and Barry Switzer is on ahead of me. And you'd have swore he's Mike Leach's agent.
I saw that.
Man, he went on and on about, you know, that Oklahoma should hire Mike Leach as their head coach. And, you know, so if I didn't know any better, I thought it was Jimmy Sexton talking, you know, you know, because you can see now the domino effect here, that one coach leaving affects the next coach and the next and the next, and what it does across college football landscape. It was unprecedented. It happens very few times that a coach like Lincoln Riley would leave Oklahoma to go to USC. Now, Jimbo left Florida State to go to A&M, but Florida State's program had started to take a bit of a slide. Not a bit of a slide, a good slide. And now you've had it basically back-to-back days. You know, Kelly leaving Notre Dame to come to LSU, Riley leaving Oklahoma to go to USC, and sort of what's next on the horizon.
Okay. I think Napier was a great hire for Florida too, Mike.
Yeah, listen, I've gotten to know Billy throughout the years that he's been at University of Louisiana. Bright guy, smart, understands that he has to play to the talent level he has and the players he can bring in. Now, it's going to be different at Florida than it was at University of Louisiana. But, man, the one thing I really liked about him is ability to relate to players and putting him in the right spot to produce. I think sometimes you can recruit talent, but is it talent team-wise? Is it for the betterment of the team? Mm-hmm. And he did a great job of selling himself as a guy that could recruit players that fit a certain pattern that he wanted, and then he adjusted his system to the talents of that player. And, you know, again, he did a great job here. And I'm telling you, he's going to do a really good job at Florida too. He wasn't the guy Scott wanted, and there was no real contact between the two sides with Napier. Same thing with Aranda. Same thing with Lane Kiffin. You know, that was no contact with Scott. With that, Scott wanted an established coach that was a grown-up in the room. Not that Billy's not, but I think he wanted to go in a different direction. And come on, there's some snobbishness part of this too. There are some people at LSU that are saying, wait a minute, we going to get the University of Louisiana head coach.
Right.
Now you got to go up against him. Okay? That's the other part of it. And Billy's going to do a great job. Billy is a terrific coach. He's got a very fertile mind. He is a really good recruiter. And I know I've told you this before, in Louisiana, in recruiting, and, you know, LSU's the king. I mean, every once in a while you get a few players leave. And they're going to lose some players this year just because the connection is not there. And Orgeron, that was his strong point, really, to be honest. He could recruit the state of Louisiana. He could build that levy. If there was competition, it was Alabama. It was no state school. It was no school out in Texas grabbing Louisiana kids. It was Alabama grabbing them. And now a lot of that having to do with Pete Golding, who's from here, who's from Louisiana. And he was kind of in charge of recruiting that. But Billy could get the 2s and 3s. And you see, before when we do all these camps, it wasn't that way. You know, University of Louisiana or Southwest Louisiana, UL Lafayette, where's that at? You know, a lot of these guys, they it wasn't on their list, and yet Billy was grabbing them, and he sold that program really, really well. And man, he's in fertile ground in Florida, man. And so I saw what he did here. I think he'll do an excellent job there. They'll be well coached. He's a tough guy too. I mean, you know, he's a guy that stresses that mental toughness and not making these mental mistakes. And He's totally different from Dan, personality-wise, and his look at the game is different.
Mike Detillier, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. He joins us on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line, Great American IPA. We now have Brian Kelly, left Notre Dame. He's at LSU. Billy Napier at Florida. Lincoln Riley at Southern Cal. So, what? How would you say the LSU fan base has reacted to this? Is it pretty overwhelming that they're super excited about this hire, Mike?
I would say it's probably 70-30 for Kelly at this stage. Listen, you could have hired Nick Saban. People would have been bitching here. I mean, you come on, you got a fan base that's always got a complaint about something. And, it wouldn't have mattered who was, because they think they know better than everybody else. There are some people now, especially with social media, everybody's become an athletic director. And so listen, you guys been through it. If it's at State or Ole Miss,
sure.
Everybody's an athletic director. They know who to coach and who is and who ain't, and they can figure everything out. So I think it's much more of a positive than a negative. But I think some people felt they should have went after Billy Napier. I think some people felt they should have went after Dave Aranda. It's going to stroll the gambit. But again, that's the social media world we live in. But it's much more positive than negative. And I can say it was not that way when they hired Nick, because I did it. I did talk show radio back then, and it was 70-30 against him. Now you can't find any of those people today. I mean, they leave no footprints in the sand. They can say what they got to say, and then they move on. And a lot of them with a delete button on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and delete some of them comments years later. So I think it's much more on the positive.
All right, tell me about. Do I have this right, Mike? LSU insider Mike Detillier on the Out of Bounds show. Notre Dame was in on a Louisiana quarterback by the name of Walker Howard. Is that right?
They were. Now, Walker was an early commit
and now
LSU.
They think he'll go to LSU?
Yeah, well, he's the son of Jamie Howard.
Oh, no, yes. Okay, got it now.
He's the son of Jamie Howard, who was a former LSU quarterback.
Yeah.
He's a legacy guy. And at St. Thomas More. And he was a very early commit to LSU. And that scared off every other quarterback that was looking in that direction. Because if you've seen him play, he's a cut above. He is a really good football player. And so Notre Dame was in on Howard early, just like they were with Arch early. They were one of the early teams to go after Manning. In the same way with Howard.
How would you compare? I know they're in different classes, but there's only a year between them. How would you compare Walker Howard, who is a top 5 guy in the 2022 class, compared to Arch Manning, who's the number 1 quarterback in the 2023 class? Mike?
Howard probably a tad more mobile in being able to move around. He's underrated for that. He is they both are accurate. They both know where to go with the football, and are both gym rats on the same level, absolutely same level. I think probably Arch is a little bit more refined from a technical standpoint, but it's a hair-splitting thing between the two of them. It's really close. It's really close. And listen, even Archie and I have talked about this, that, between the two of them, the name recognition Arch gets, and certainly you got to carry that with you. Good, and there's some good and some bad with it. Jamie Howard's son is different than being Cooper Manning's son. You get it?
Sure.
It's different, but they're similar type players in a lot of ways. Their demeanor's a little bit different. I think Arch's got a little bit of his dad's personality that he sort of will fun around with you and stuff like that. Walker's a very serious guy, almost always very serious. And so their personalities are a little bit different, but player-wise, it's close. I mean real close between the two of them.
Interesting. Okay. And so this kid is a 5-star out of Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yeah, St. Thomas More, and he's a guy that almost from day one I saw him. And listen, I got a 2.5-year-old granddaughter that could have spotted this. That guy can play. I mean, it didn't take a scout to figure that one out. No, he can hum it. He's physically gotten stronger, and it's similar to Arch. As he's matured, you can see his ability to throw the deeper ball and the velocity of the throws are better because they're physically stronger. He's not a 150-pound kid anymore. Both these guys over 200 pounds, and they work with the weights and everything else. They're both getting specialized training. It's a different world, and even Peyton still, man's far different from when he came out.
Sure.
They didn't have these quarterback schools and classes and all that all these guys go to. Now, he worked with his dad in that particular manner, but it's different world. And I think about it back-to-back years. I can't remember, other than late 60s, to have that type talent come out of Louisiana at the same time. Joe Ferguson, Burt Jones.
Yeah.
Just think of that.
Wow.
Burt Jones and Joe Ferguson. Similar talents. And Joe went to Arkansas. And Burt almost ended up at Tulane, but he ended up going to LSU. And so that's the only other time I can remember that type of talent, like back-to-back.
Wow. All right, we'll leave it there. We'll jump into more LSU and NFL and some Saints next week with Mike D. Mike Detillier, at Mike Detillier on Twitter. He joined us on the Out of Bounds show in the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. We appreciate it, Mike. Have a great week, man.
Thank you, Bo. Appreciate it.
Mike Detillier, LSU insider on LSU's new hire, Brian Kelly, leaves Notre Dame to join the LSU Tigers, and they have a 5-star committed at the quarterback position. The show is brought to you by Sound and Communications, the leader in audio and visual equipment for your sports facility, business, or church. SoundcomAV.com.